Good evening, everyone. I have 7 o'clock, and I'll call the meeting to order and ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Greg David.
Present.
Mr. Tyler Dean.
Here.
Miss Emily Hamburg.
Here.
Mr. Justin Smith.
Here.
And Mr. John Welch.
Present.
And you have a quorum, Mayor.
Thank you. This evening, we have Mr. Mark Posson here, to Bel Aire resident and pastor, to lead us in prayer.
Thank you very much. Let's go in prayer. Father, we're thankful for this wonderful day. Father, we're also thankful for the prospect of cooler weather and days to come, for the impending fall season and the beauty that it brings and the colors. Father, it just reminds us of just the beauty of your creation. Father, I thank you for the city manager, for the city council members, for the city administrator and staff. Father, for the service that they provide for this community. And Father, we just pray that you would just bless the discussion. Father, that you would provide wisdom for those and the decisions and discussions that take place tonight. Father, the decisions that are made, may they bless those that call Bel Aire home. And Father, we just thank you for those who are in emergency services. Father, we thank you for those who serve on our police department, for the fire department, for other emergency services. Father, as they provide for the safety and protection of those within this community, would you provide for their safety and protection? And Father, we just give this evening to you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Please join me in a pledge of allegiance to the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item 5 is agenda additions, or do we have any additions to the agenda? Hearing none, I'll move on to the consent agenda. It only contains the minutes of the September 7th regular council meeting and the September 13th special county council meeting.
Mr. Mayor,
Ms. Hamburg.
I was just going to say, the city clerk just wanted to point out that she made one small correction on our special meeting from September 13th about who made the extension of the executive meeting. So it's the only thing I wanted to point out, that it changed recently.
Okay, thank you. I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. David.
make a motion to approve the consent agenda as listed and authorize the mayor to sign. I'll second.
Motion by Mr. David, second by Mr. Dean. Call for a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 5-0. Move on to appropriations ordinance. So planning and zoning purchased a new map plotter from ARC Document Solutions at the cost of $6,000. Meters and meter parts for new meter installs accounted for almost $86,000, for most of $87,000 expense with core and main. And utility maintenance contractors installed 22 new water service lines and repaired a leaky fire hydrant at a cost of $39,662. Are there any questions for Finance Director? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Mayor,
Ms. Hamburg.
I make a motion to approve appropriations ordinance 22-17 in the amount of $360,775.89.
I will second.
Motion by Ms. Hamburg, second by Mr. Smith. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 5-0. City requested appearances, so the city is required by state statutes to complete a financial audit each year. So Allen Gibbs and Hulick is the company with whom we contract for this service. Tara Laughlin is here to present the 2021 City of Bel Aire financial audit. Ms. Laughlin. I believe everybody had a copy placed at their desk.
Good evening. So I'm Tara Laughlin. I work at Allen Gibbs and Hulick, or AGH, in our government auditing department. I'm a vice president and oversee the audit of the City of Bel Aire. This evening, I'm going to go over the audit results for the fiscal year 21 audit. So I'm going to be highlighting, you guys should have a governance letter in your packet. I'm going to be highlighting some items outside of that letter, which just summarizes the results of the audit. Some of this language is kind of standard from year to year, so I'm going to highlight what's specific for this year's audit. Before I go into that detail, the scope of services that we do provide the city of course, is the financial statement audit. And I want to thank Ted and all of his staff that help us throughout the audit. It's a lot of work on top of daily jobs. We come in and bug them for a while. So just appreciate everybody's helpfulness during that process. They're all very quick to get us support we need and very open to our questions. So starting up through the letter, at the bottom of page 1, I just always like to highlight that this year there was really no new significant accounting policies or new standards that the city had to implement. So when you're looking at last year's financials to this year's, changes in financial statement numbers are really due to changes in operations, not because something had to be accounted for differently because of standard changes. So just wanted to point that out. Page 2, we talk about management estimates. Of course, not all numbers can be hard, fast known numbers within financial statements. There are some estimates involved. We are required to disclose those what considered significant estimates. None of these have changed from prior years, and none of the estimation processes have changed. So as far as the audit goes, we are required to get an understanding of how management determines those estimates, make sure they're being done in line with the appropriate accounting standards, where we review the inputs, calculations, outputs, and make sure it's all being done reasonable in line with the standards. And we did find in all cases that those were being done reasonably. Your significant estimates is estimating some of the land sale values that are recorded as assets. And then the last 2 items are really related to retirement liabilities. So the net pension liability is the city's share of the CAPER's overall net pension liability. And then the total other post-employment benefit liability is the city's share of the CAPER's death and disability plan, which is considered an other retirement liability. So all of those, again, we did find to be done reasonably. Audit adjustments made, those that are maybe new to the council this year, the city records their financial information throughout the year on a budgetary basis to be in line with Kansas statutes. When we come in and do the audit, we do a number of entries to get from the budgetary basis to a GAAP basis. So those audit adjustments that are listed there are pretty standard ones that we do year over year. We didn't really have anything new this year that we haven't done in the past. And again, those were all items mostly related to like long-term assets, long-term liabilities, year-end accruals, those things that are only done on a GAAP basis that you don't need in your system to be in line with budget law with the state of Kansas. So again, nothing really new significant as far as audit adjustments go from what we typically do every year. Bottom of page 2, we are also required to discuss uncorrected misstatements. What those are items that might come up during the audit that instead of being adjusted and reflected within the financial statements, they're what we call passed on and not reflected in the financials. Those are usually because they're due to timing, so they self-correct the next year. We had none of those items this year, so everything that we brought up is reflected within the financial statements that you have. Moving to page 3, the second paragraph, I always like to highlight. Again, I kind of mentioned this at the outset. We had no disagreements with management. Everybody provided us support, timely, answered our questions, was very open to the questions that we had as we worked through the audit process. So I always like to highlight that. Starting on page 3, again, for those that are new to the council from last year, due to the audit adjustments that I just discussed, going from the budget basis to the GAAP basis, we do have over financial reporting a material weakness, and that's because we're doing some of the prep of those adjustments, and it just increases the risk that potentially something is missed. Again, as far as tracking information within the city's financial statements, that's done accurately to be in line with budget state law. And we don't have very many budget adjustments. It's really just that gap conversion. So that's what that control item is covering. Down to the bottom of page 4 and onto page 5, again, due to the small size of the city operations and city personnel, we do have some segregation of duties items in various areas. I do want to highlight, if you look at last year's letter to this year's, we have added some information about the city is working on adding some additional mitigating controls over some of these areas. They're not all quite there yet, but I went ahead and provided some information through discussions and reviewing some items in the system with Ted with what's being worked on to add some mitigating controls in those areas. So I'm going to highlight on those here shortly. In the payroll item, which is the first item, one item that the city is working on implementing is an additional review of payroll change report that the system can generate. So that would be reviewed by somebody who can't access and make payroll changes. So they'll be verifying that any change rates or anything like that that happens in the system was done accurately by getting somebody outside of that process reviewing those changes. In the accounting system, again, really due to the small size and the need for having kind of one person over the accounting system, that just is a segregation of duties issue. However, starting in fiscal year 23, the city is going to implement an additional control where the city clerk reviews the budget that's put into the system, because you guys use the budget to actual kind of track how the city's doing throughout the year. So the city clerk's going to review and make sure that gets inputted correctly so that you know when you're looking at your reports that your budget numbers match what you certified with the state. Related to accounts receivable and revenue, again, an additional control that the city is implementing starting in fiscal year 23 is again related to rate changes. So having somebody outside of making those rate changes in the system check to make sure that they were done accurately and in line with what's been approved as far as utility rates go. And one item that was fully addressed during the year was related to being able to write checks and just access to checks and ACH wire payment approvals. The bank now does require 2 authorizations for that, and that was implemented during 21. So nobody can unilaterally make a wire transfer. The bank's going to call a second person to make sure that and verify that it is an appropriate transfer. So I didn't want to highlight on those things because these are items we have had historically year over year within the governance letter, and just wanted to point out that steps are being taken. It just takes a little bit of time to get all those controls and new processes in place. The next item that we always just discuss with all of our clients, no matter kind of what industry they're in, is just related to cybersecurity. Probably many of you have heard more companies, more governments are getting attacked with cyber threats. So it just provides some additional information of what's out there so that you're aware of what's going on in the cybersecurity world, and to be able to ask questions, if you have concerns or want to know how the city's addressing that, probably be some good questions to ask and discuss as well. So overall, in summary, again, an unmodified opinion on the financial statements, and pretty similar results to prior years, and there are some additional mitigating controls being worked on for some of those control issues that are noted within the letter. And I will open it up to any questions or any additional comments Ted would like to make.
So we've been working together pretty hard on, it's really just a staff of 2 down there. So in order to remove or address some of these controls, we have to bring in more people. It's just the nature of the beast. The good part is the financial software that we're using is starting to upgrade itself. Before I could only turn on or off privileges to certain areas. So most of the people would have no to everything but myself and the city treasurer. Now I have a sliding scale so I can turn off certain areas to others. So that kind of helps, but the fact still remains I'm the admin of the software. So they would like to see, the city clerk review some of that stuff. And we're trying to get rid of some of that. The other thing, and the one thing I'm happy about that we were able to get done this year, and was the check the certain wire transfers, and a lot of that again had to do with our bank upgrading their system, and that I have to process a lot of that online and put in a Google authenticating code, and then it sends automatic to our city treasurer, Ty, to approve, to be the second approval. So a lot of that different things that we're helping mitigate is because our technology is evolving through the city, which is nice. But those are really the only changes we've had from year over year.
Any questions for Ms. Laughlin or Ted?
Yep, Mr. Mayor.
Mr.
Just when you look at the areas where you highlighted segregation of duties, opportunities for the city, is that pretty typical of what you see in other entities of our size?
Yeah, I mean, at entities of your size, we only have really a couple people that kind of have their hands over everything. It's going to be hard to have adequate segregation of duties issues. So it's important to have those mitigating controls in place, which are those items that the city is working on adding.
Terry, you might give a little bit. We're one of the few cities that actually use gap-based budgeting or a full. You might talk. So there's a KMAG as well. You might.
Yeah. So a lot of cities, this size, smaller, do not necessarily produce what we call gap basis financial statements, which is full accrual, everything like businesses would report. There is an election that's allowed through the state is to do a KMAG basis audit, which is a Kansas Municipal Audit and Accounting Guide, which really correlates to budget basis. So the financial statements would really be, you're looking at your budget to actuals, cash basis plus some accounts payable. So it simplifies the reporting process, which for entities of this size, a lot of them elect to do that because you just don't have the resources. And that's what kind of brings up a lot of those audit adjustments is really just, it's a resource constraint to do gap basis financials with a group of two. So.
Well, I am glad to see the improvement on the 5 areas of responsibility that you've outlined here, because those are things that I thought for some time that we needed to address, and I think I'm glad we're making some progress on that. That's good. That's very good news. Thank you. Any other questions or concerns? If not, thank you for your time, and
Appreciate it.
obviously a lot of work there. So thank you. Move on to item 9, citizen concerns, and I do have 4 citizens that have asked to speak. So the first one is Mr. Gary Jans. If you please come to the podium and state your name and address, we'll let you speak for 3 minutes.
Gary Jantz, 6200 East 45th Street North. My father was a general contractor for 45 years as Frank Jantz and Sons Construction Company. We built many custom homes all over Wichita and surrounding area. My main concern is the size of Lot 6 of 2.34 acres. Seems too small to house 36 units and lacks the open space needed, especially for fire safety. On August 31st, 22, I went to Sedgwick County District 1 Fire Prevention Unit, and I spoke to Robert Timmons and asked him if the buildings were too close to the property lines, and he said the Bel Aire City Code sets the distance to property lines. Referring to firemarshal.kansas.gov website, each rental unit should also be equipped with a fire extinguisher or automatic sprinkler system or both. Automatic sprinkler system would be the safest for everyone. Now, referring to belaireKansas.citycode.net, R6 multifamily district is intended to provide for development of well-designed garden apartment complexes with emphasis on open space. And the minimum lot per dwelling unit should be 3,630 feet. And referring to the site plan layout, Lot 6 is 101,997 square feet. You divide that by 36 dwelling units equals 2,833 and 0.25 square feet, which is less than the dwelling per city code. On this minimum side yards is supposed to be 15 feet from property lines and 75 feet from adjoining land zone C2. The minimum rear yards should be 35 feet from property line and 75 feet from adjoining land zone C2. Only the west property line meets the city code. But understanding that this is under a planned unit development, PUD, zoning standards and regulations may be varied or modified as part of the PUD plan approval and rezoning process lot area. Based on this, I feel the modifications to the property lines from the city code is extreme with negative impact to surrounding property owners, adding to fire danger and safety. Thank you.
Thank you. Next citizen we have is Miss Carol Russell.
My name is Carol Russell. I live at 6218 East 45th Street North in Bel Air. My property is adjacent to the proposed Arthur Heights PUD on two sides. I have reviewed the plan from the packet dated July 14th. The complex does not blend into the surrounding properties and still doesn't provide adequate drainage protection. The homes on the adjacent properties are ranch-level yard homes. The design to be built is for proposed R6 is two-story property buildings still with an inadequate drainage. To prevent flood damage to adjacent properties west and south, there should be a 24-inch solid cement footing to protect the runoff from the complex structures and an 8-foot fence constructed on top of that to prevent rot of posts sitting in runoff water. This will also provide a constructed privacy and sound barrier for the proposed complex. Philip Jordan, Planning Commission member, stated on July 4th that we have apartment complexes in several areas of Bel Aire butted up to establish residential homes. I have not found any of this at this time that are the same situation. I did find a townhome duplex development butting up to residential in Wichita. I have a picture of the arrangement. The design proposed for the two-story dwellings would work better on a corner lot with appropriate drainage and spacing. I did see plenty of examples of this type of development with access to fire in Bel Aire and Wichita. I'm also concerned about the security of the properties. The current number of police officers is inadequate per the standard of 2 officers per 1,000 residents. We have 88,560 residents, so by the 2-officer benchmark, we should have 17 patrol officers. The budget that was approved the last city commission meeting was to add 1 more full-time officer. Knowing that we have at least 200 more individuals in our proposed complex, that would bring our total of full-time officer needs to 18. This is the end of my statement. I'd like to have the opportunity for rebuttal any statements after the other presentation. Do you have any questions for me?
No, Miss.
Nope.
Miss Kelly, did you have?
Mr. Mayor, just so this is public comment, there will also be a time period where the council conducts a hearing for the, I believe this is a hearing where you don't have to have a hearing because Planning Commission already had a hearing. So yeah, there is not a built-in time for rebuttal or time for back and forth with the council. The standard is to have public comment, and those 3 minutes are for the public.
And that was done with Planning Commission.
Correct. Right. The hearing would have been at Planning Commission, and it would have gone back and forth. So.
All right, thank you. Thank you. The next citizen is Dan Bleem, if I'm saying your name correctly.
Thank you all. I basically want to talk about
Can you please state your name and address for the record?
Dan Bleem, 4630 North Hillcrest.
Thank you.
And basically I want to at least discuss or complain about getting notice of meetings and whatnot. Now, we have been on this Arthur Heights thing for several times, and I've only gotten basically one meeting notification and have been pretty much dealt out of the other meetings before the Planning Commission. So I'm not quite as well versed in all the things that have been discussed by these other people and everything. In case anybody is interested, I am not in favor of the building of these units. I've lived in this residence for about 60 years, and it's been quiet and peaceful. We moved in because they were big lots and a small number of people and everything. And why that has suddenly changed, I don't know. If you're going to put a commercial thing in there, it would be, we could expect that at least at night, there probably would be little activity, that they would have hours for be open for business. So I don't need the extra noise coming from too many people just over the fence. And I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Can you clarify one thing for me, please? You said you were concerned about the notice of meetings. If I understand, and I don't remember this exactly right, but we had a planning commission meeting and it got canceled for a lack of quorum or something like that. Did we not send out new notices for the rescheduled meeting?
Okay, I got the new notice.
You did get the new notice?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So you got that one. Were you able
But
to
then
make it
there
the
was
meeting?
there was one planning commission meeting here lately and everything that I had no notice of.
Okay. Was this the subject of that meeting?
Yes.
Okay. All right. If we could please look into that. I'd ask the city clerk to please look into that to see if we got adequate notice of everybody. All right. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
And next is Miss Rebecca Armstrong. And that was my warning time.
And I'm Rebecca Armstrong, 4306 North Rushwood Circle, Bel Aire. And thank you for your service. And I appreciate Mark Possum, who recognized the blessing of nature and how the beauty we have. So I appreciate that. I have a concern about the future and our lack of preparation, discussion, and action about climate change that is here now and will be even more challenging as we go forward. We've built 11 subdivisions. They don't have enough open space. They're not utilizing nature's resources to our benefit. Those natural areas, clean water, they clean air. We're not utilizing those. We're destroying them. It's like a scorched earth technique. They're going in with large bulldozers, running everything down. Any trees are gone. All the soil is ripped up, and they're leaving it. It's not going to help us going forward. It's going to make it more difficult for the future, for our children, for our grandchildren. And we can do it differently. We don't have to do it this way. The fish dead in Bel Aire pond, that's the climate change that's happening. Scientists have talked about that. They know that. One of the things we're doing is we're putting huge amounts of fertilizer on our lawns. The city of Bel Aire does that. They come to our park, they throw fertilizer on all the parks. That fertilizer doesn't go into the grass. It washes 80% of it and more, washes into the water, into our water system, into our watershed. That's what causes those algae blooms. Those are huge fertilizer beds of water that then end up with an algae bloom. The algae bloom is poisonous to our dogs. It's poisonous to us. So we don't have to do it that way, but we have to have discussion and dialogue about how else to do it. We're not having that. And that's my concern. We can have open spaces. We don't have to put duplexes everywhere. We can do better planning with bringing in the community and talking about it. In 2014, we had a document that was created by citizens of Bel Aire, and they talked about open spaces. They talked about connectivity, sidewalks leading to the parks connected, the parks connected with the school. You look in these developments, the sidewalks go nowhere. There's no parks in these developments. You look over here at this school, there's not even crosswalks. You know, your kids can't walk to school because they have to get on the street to walk. There's no crosswalks. There's sidewalks to nowhere, and we can do better. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your comments. I have no other cards, citizen concerns. Are there other citizens here that would like to speak? I don't see any, but okay. All right, we'll move on to council member reports. Mr. Welch, would you like to start off?
I have no report, Mr. Mayor.
Ms. Hamburg?
Thank you, Mayor. Attended the regular Lions meeting last week. We're continuing to sell concessions at the Saturday morning soccer games. It's an opportunity to support the club in that way. And then we won't be back again together before then. So just want to remind citizens that October 1st is our citywide cleanup for the fall. So keep that on your calendar and see the website for all of the details. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Smith?
No report.
Mr. David?
No report, thank you.
Mr. Dean?
Mr. Mayor, just wanted to add to announcements, the next Bel Aire Chamber meeting will actually be the first, it's always the first Wednesday of every month, and anybody's invited. It's between 11:30 and 1. It's held here at the community center in City Hall. Obviously, we care about our local businesses and want to support those, so invite you to come and attend. That next meeting then will be on October 5th, which is the Wednesday right after our next council meeting. So just a reminder. And then I actually, walking in, noticed the advertisement on the door downstairs. So I'll give a shout out to Bel Aire PD's putting on a cobbers fishing clinic, which is actually October 8th. So it'll be that following Saturday.
Very good.
That's my report.
Thank you. So we'll move on to the mayor's report. So on September 8th, I did attend a CCUA special meeting with KDHE to address some concerns that KDHE has with effluent from the wastewater treatment. So CCUA is putting a plan together to address those concerns. While a little unusual, this is somewhat common for KDHE to raise concerns with wastewater treatment effluent in order to keep our rivers and streams clean. So on September 10th, I did attend the Sedgwick County Association of Cities meeting in Keachai. The biggest issue raised during this meeting was a proposed by some Sedgwick County commissioners to establish a fire district advisory committee. And the purpose of this commission is to advise the Sedgwick County Commission on issues related to Sedgwick County Fire District. On September 12th, I attended a focus group sponsored by Southern Star Pipeline. Southern Star Pipeline has a natural gas pipeline that runs through Bel Aire. So the focus group meeting is required by regulation to review proposed brochures designed to advise elected officials of pipeline safety issues. So the biggest takeaway was that 10-page brochure was way too long for most people to read and digest. So on September 13th, I attended the monthly WAMPO Transportation Policy Board meeting and still need volunteers for the annual bike and pedestrian count. That starts tomorrow and it'll last through Saturday. The bike count has been expanded in the area, so more volunteers are needed. If you're interested in volunteering, you can contact Dora Gallo. Her email is dora.gallo@wampo.org. The phone number is 316-779-1315. The Transportation Policy Board also has presented draft changes in Employee and Operations Manual as well as the TBP-TAC bylaws amendments. So these will be considered and approved in our October meeting. And then they were also given an overview of a design concept for a new Delano multimodal transit center across from the Riverfront Stadium. This will have access for car parking, bicycle racks, buses, Greyhound bus, and Wichita buses. And on September 14th, I attended the Utility Advisory Committee. They discussed possible improvements in boil water advisory communication with Tristan Terhune. And what has happened in recent past is that advisories have been issued by KDHE and included Bel Aire in their initial release. And after learning more facts, KDHE removed Bel Aire from the scope of the advisory. So this has caused some confusion for Bel Aire citizens. September 16th, I attended the K254 Corridor Plan Consultant interviews. There were 3 presenters. We reviewed the presentations and asked questions of the presenters and gave input to KDOT concerning our thoughts on these proposals. KDOT plans to have a decision on which proposal they will accept this Friday, September 23rd, or by this Friday. Could be any day. This plan study will take about a year and will be a master plan for future improvements along K254. This will involve citizens from the corridor communities, so be watching for announcements for opportunity to provide your thoughts on this important highway. And just a reminder that McConnell Air Force Base is holding an air show that open house this coming weekend. It's a great opportunity to see what's new with the Air Force. I understand Air Force Thunderbirds will be there. I had incorrect information that the Navy's Blue Angels were going to be there, so I apologize for repeating that information. So the Thunderbirds will put on a great demonstration of their flying skills. And I have arranged to hold a coffee with the mayor on October 22nd at 10 a.m. at Los Canados. They don't open till 11, but this will be a great opportunity to talk about citizen concerns and then have lunch at Los Canados. So I hope we will fill the restaurant. And please support Los Canados and Dollar General at 45th and Woodlawn. They do need our business during the construction time. I'll now ask our city attorney for her report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The council will be taking up the Arthur Heights PUD revision today. And I wanted to just give a little bit of information, just the factual groundwork for the public. This was an area that was rezoned prior to today, and it was there's a PUD on that ground, and a PUD is a planned unit development. The original planned unit development is Ordinance 642. It's for Block 1, Lot 4, 5, and 6, and portions of Lot 7 in that area. And it states currently that the development shall be in conformance with the City of Bel Aire standards for C1 developments, except that, and now I'm summarizing, if the property be developed for residential purposes, then the property shall be developed to R5 standards. R5 standards allow a density of 6 dwellings per acre. This is about 2.3 acres. The issue is that the current owner of the property wanted to be able to put in more units. So in order to not conform with R5, the PUD had to be revised. So it's still under planned unit development. It can still be a mix of residential and commercial, but what Planning Commission has recommended is that the residential aspect of that development be allowed to be R6 and allowed for just over 15 dwellings per acre. So that's the change that's before council today. It's amending an existing planned unit development. I don't remember having done that since I've been here, so I wanted the public to have a good background of what's being discussed today. Another item that just came up is, when is notice required? And I think I understand from the gentleman who spoke, he's using 2 definitions of notice. And in these zoning cases, whenever Planning Commission has a meeting, anyone can get on the list to be notified. And that's a legal requirement that if the city's commissions or boards meet, they notify the group and post it on the doors that we're having a meeting. And people can contact the city clerk and they will receive notice of a city meeting. Another type of notice that would have been given here would have been property owners within 200 feet of the zoning change would have gotten notice of a PUD amendment which is before council. So this property owner may have received several notices of the city meeting or not any notices because it's published on the doors, but they would have certainly received legal notice that a PUD or a zoning matter was coming before the council that was within 200 feet of their property. So those are the two types of notices here. I can confirm that the legal notice to amend the PUD was given because that's one of the items that Planning Commission reviews and is required to consider before moving an item forward to council. So as far as a personal notice, if that person is on the list that the city clerk has, they would have received personal notice of that meeting. So those are the two types of notice that would have been in play here.
Thank you for the clarification. Move on to Assistant City Manager report.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate Cops and Bobbers is October 8th from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. or noon at Central Park Ponds. It's a good opportunity for the kids and also our officers to be out in the public and be visible. The other thing, Fall Festival is October 15th at the Rec Center from 10 a.m. to 2. Always fun, car show, animals, crafts for the kids. So a couple of good weekends scheduled in October for Bel Aire.
Very good. Thank you. Move on to item 9A that everybody wants to talk about tonight. So this is the amendment to the Arthur Heights Planned Unit Development. At their August 23rd meeting, Planning Commission reviewed the applicant's request to change the current PUD to allow R6 multifamily zoning and held a public hearing on the matter. 3 residents voiced their concerns. Following public hearing, Planning Commission considered the evidence and discussed the application in relation to city zoning regulations and the common criteria for zoning known as the golden factors. Commissioners noted that the surrounding area had several different zoning types and that allowed PUD to fit in the existing character of the neighborhood. They noted the addition of green space is helpful in R6 zoning, and the drainage plan and screening plan submitted by the applicant's engineering met requirements for zoning code. They were also noted that the property had been vacant for several years under the current zoning, and having thoroughly reviewed the issues, Planning Commission voted by passing a 5-0 motion to recommend changing the partial zoning within the current PUD to allow R6 multifamily housing with the condition of a default 8-foot fence or appropriate screening as otherwise mutually agreed upon with the neighboring properties. So I believe that we may have some people that want to make a presentation for us. Mr. Ken Lee.
Good evening. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm Ken Lee with Garver, 1995 Midfield Road, Wichita. I'm the agent for the applicant. Russ Rolfe is the developer. He's here as well if questions come up. I don't know if you want the whole story, but I decided just to be thorough so you understand, and you've heard concerns. So we just I wanted to kind of walk through and talk about the project and make sure that you all understand what the process was, what went on, what decisions were made, what changes were made, so you have a good understanding before you make a decision tonight. I do have to mention 2 things. First, Tyler Dean was recognized as an outstanding young professional in construction recently. So I saw that pop up recently. So I hadn't heard any kudos on that, but he is definitely an outstanding young professional. And then I just got a text from my daughter-in-law that I'm going to be a grandpa either tonight or tomorrow. So so it's
Congratulations to both of you.
busy night. So I'm going to jump into the PUD. I did give a handout earlier. It's not going to be an exact order of this. If you're looking at the sheets that have there's different dates on them. There's August, July, and May on those. So you can kind of get a sense of the order of them when I'm talking through up here if you need to. So tonight I'm going to be talking about the Arthur Heights Planned Unit Development Amendment 1. And originally we turned this into city staff, probably actually back in April was our first submittal to city staff. And our first submittal, we actually had 23 buildings on the lot, which was 46 dwelling units, 75 parking stalls. And it's important to note that the zoning requires 2 parking stalls per unit, which would have meant we were short by 17 parking stalls because 92 were required. We had some underground detention proposed under the parking here. I had talked with Keith Price. There were some concerns about the fire code earlier. I actually did talk with Keith specifically about building spacing before we laid this out to make sure that we met the city's fire code for our building spacing. And the 11 feet was the distance required based on what we're trying to do. And then, so because as mentioned already, the density exceeded the R5 requirement, so we needed to go to R6. If you read the language of the original PUD that was done in 2019, it actually specifically says the zoning can be modified with approval of Planning Commission and City Council. It actually included language in the PUD, but it did state that it had to go through the Planning Commission and City Council process, not just an administrative process. So that's why we're here tonight, is to do that. So after we went with city staff and we made some changes based on comments from the city, we reduced the building count to 20 units. And we, instead of having just a single lane, this one just had one lane coming into the project. We, after discussing it with Chief Timmons at Sedgwick County Fire, we did a split layout on the driveway where we had two 24-foot drives. That necessitated the removal of 3 buildings on the site. We were providing 66 parking stalls, which did not still meet the requirement. And we had moved the underground detention to here. And this is the first meeting where everybody heard about it. There was a lot of concerns about not meeting the parking requirement by code. And we were asking for a variance from code because PUDs allow that. But it's one of those things. The Planning Commission had a lot of concern about that. There was a lot of discussion about impact on neighbors, and one of the requests was to put a screening fence around the entire property at that meeting. There was a number of other concerns. The drainage was brought up. The folks here, they were concerned about tree removal on their property and losing their trees. And so we listened to all of that, and it ended up getting tabled in July. Because there was just too many concerns to approve it. And so they wanted to give us an opportunity to come back and show that we could meet the requirements. And I will say on the comment about not getting notice, it's possible that the gentleman who got notice got the meeting notice for July, because that's the one you're supposed to give a notice every 200 for everybody 200 feet. Given that it was tabled, I don't know that that same applies when it's going to the next meeting, because they've already received notice. So if they're interested in the meeting, they would have attended. So that's possible why there was no notice for that second meeting. I'm not saying that's the case, but it's a possibility of how that happened. So then we redid came back again, taking the feedback that we had, and we made a number of changes to the project. And I've kind of highlighted them a little bit on this version of the PUD amendments turned in August. We took an additional 2 units out to get us down to 18 units, which was 18 buildings, which is 36 dwelling units. We were told you have to meet the parking requirement, and they said, frankly, we don't want you to just meet the parking requirement. We want you to exceed it. And so what we did is we ended up with adding 11 spots, which now we have a total of 77, and there's 72 required. So we actually have 5 more parking spots than required. We actually looked at putting in more parking spots here, but you've heard the comment. You heard the comment earlier about open space and a desire for open space. After discussions with city staff and looking at it and with the developer, we decided that providing that extra open space was more important than trying to squeeze a few more parking stalls out of the site. So we do meet the code requirements for parking, but we also, by virtue of getting rid of those buildings, we did introduce an additional extra open space for folks who live in that community. At this point in time, it's planned to be just like open space for picnics or whatever folks want to do. We're not proposing playgrounds or anything like that at this time, but the developer said he'll kind of talk with the residents over time and see if there's a different use for that space. There's a little bit more of open space here in the middle above our underground detention. That's a grassed area between the aisles there. And there's going to be underground detention under there. And we didn't want to have a bunch of paving over the top of it. So that'll be a good place. Folks who live here, they can take their pets out there and do their business or whatever. So we've got a couple different open space spots. We did modify the fire lane in the project because originally it was 24 and 24. And if you look now, it's hard to see, but your print, you can see it. It's 26 and 20. And so I'd called Chief Timmons up and said, look, we're wanting to change the site. We want to try and see how narrow we can make the one fire lane.
And he said, we can go down to 20 feet on the one as long as we provide 26 feet on the other. So that's what we did. And what that allowed us is this little green strip along the west property line there. That allowed us to create a buffer space that we could put some additional vegetative screening in for the folks to the west who they didn't want to see the project. They wanted us to put as much between them and the project as possible. So we introduced another 5 feet of space. And we had recommended doing a natural barrier of 12 to 15 foot tall arborvitae along that property line. If you read the report from the Planning Commission, they said that they wanted to have us coordinate with the property owner to determine what the preferred screening was, a fence or arborvitae. And I spoke with them tonight and they said that they would prefer the fence. They don't feel like the arborvitae provides adequate security for the property between them and this property, and they'd rather have a solid fence. We'll talk with the developer about this. We'll still do some planting in that space, whether we do arborvitae or we do something else. We'll still plant something in that space, but it may not be dense arborvitae the way we were proposing. But the other thing that we did is, you heard the comments about drainage. We added some storm sewer that goes up and back here. We've got 2 storm sewer inlets on the north side here to pick up drainage on the north. And then we've got 2 inlets down here. This one will pick up any water off this green space. This one will pick up any water that comes from this adjacent property in here. And it'll be graded each way to make sure that any water that runs off of these buildings is contained on our site and goes into our storm sewer. Our goal is to have these folks see less water than they see today, that they'll have less stormwater runoff than they see today. That's our plan. And then, as mentioned, the blue line shows the 8-foot fence that is added around the entire perimeter site. Given the feedback we received earlier tonight, that fence is actually going to extend along here as well. So I'll say the system actually worked. We started out with a plan that was really dense. We got feedback from staff that said, nah, that we can't take that to Planning Commission. That's not going to be acceptable. We took it to Planning Commission. We got feedback from the neighbors and the Planning Commission members, and they said, you got to do better. And so we came back again. And so the system worked here where it gave us opportunities to try and provide a product that's, better for not only our developer, but for also the folks around it. Going a little bit into this, we did look at we put together a drainage plan that's been submitted to Ann Stevens, the city engineer, for review. It's impossible to read at this scale, but there's a chart on there that shows the existing and developed runoff rates where we demonstrated that we're putting enough detention to reduce it below pre-developed rates. The green area here was the offsite green area, and we use the county LIDAR whenever we're evaluating offsite areas. And when I first started looking at this, I was like really worried because there's a lot of drainage that comes across 48th Street or 47th Street up to the north. But it turns out you can see here, if you look at the contours, there's actually, this water gets carried over to Woodlawn here rather than running into our site. So the green area is the water that actually makes it into our site, and we'll have our storm sewer size to handle that runoff as well as our own runoff. I won't go into any more detail on that right now. I will mention that we are, I guess I will say, we're putting an underground system here. It's made by ADS. It's called a Storm Tech system. It's a very common system used a lot in larger urban areas. Kansas City, they install this every single week in Kansas City. You don't see a lot of it here in Wichita, but like I believe the Walmart at 53rd and Meridian, they did a Storm Tech system there. I actually designed a Storm Tech system to go underground at NASCAR Park in downtown Wichita. So I've designed one before. It's worked well. It's a good product. It is expensive, but it works well. On the landscaping, we're actually, I didn't include the part of the landscaping plan. We actually exceed the city requirements for trees as far as the required trees for the project. We exceed the city's tree requirement for the project. You can see here, we've got trees planted along the North Road area here where we can. I wanted to have more. Our landscape architects had them drawn here, but we ended up adding that storm sewer and there's sanitary sewer there. That precludes extra trees there. We would have put more trees if we could, but the underground utilities prevented that. When we've got some trees here, again, we're going to have a storm sewer running here, so we couldn't get too many along the back of the houses. This is the arborvitae that we were talking about, and Again, we'll put something in there still, but it probably won't be as dense as that. If we're putting up a fence, there's no point in putting in the arborvitae that densely there. And I should mention, this is a preliminary landscaping plan. It'll get turned into Keith and to Ann for review at the time of plan preparation for further review and making sure that it meets all the city's codes. One of the things that was recommended is we kind of give an idea of what the houses are going to look like out there, to do some renderings of what the possible types are. These are just preliminary. As they go along, there might be some subtle changes. I'll show you on the next slide how some other ones look, but we're not going to have just one house, one color, just the whole thing filled up with 18 houses that are identical. The plan is to have at least 3 or 4 different types of styles in there to create some variety when you come into there. So it's not just a blur of the same building the whole way through. And so there's a couple different opportunities. And when you go back to here, it's hard to see, but there's a couple dash lines right here and right here. Evergy requires that we provide access to their easements in the back for them to be able to maintain their equipment. So we can't have stairwells in that area there or that area there. So those buildings that are adjacent to that are the ones that will be more likely to have this kind of stair front in the front, as opposed to one where the stairs go down the side of the house. So what this is showing is there's a balcony in front and then the stairs go down the side of the house. So there'll be a mixture of, we've got stone, we may have red brick, we may have white brick, different colored houses. Just, we want some variety. We don't want it to be a blur of houses. This is a project at Kellogg and Oliver this is almost the exact same size homes that we're talking about. And that's at Kellogg and Oliver. It's on the east side of Oliver, just north of Kellogg. We don't have the gabled roofs like this. Russ is proposing to do hipped roofs on these houses. And so we won't have the gable roofs like this, but there'll be hipped roofs. But in general, the rest of it will look a lot like that as far as how it looks. These have carports. He hasn't finalized any decisions on carports. That's not part of the PUD process. So we haven't made any final decisions on that. But in this case, they had carports. This is the arborvitae that we were talking about, that we were proposing along the property line. That, again, if we do something, it would be less dense, but there may still be some desire to do a little bit of that just to give it a little bit more appeal as you enter the project. And then these pictures at the bottom show the storm tech chambers. Our system won't be as wide as this one. This is a pretty wide system. Ours will only be 2 bays wide, but they're large chambers. They're going to be 5 foot tall, buried they'll actually be a little over 7 feet deep underground, and it'd be 7 to 8 feet underground. There'll be 2 feet of rock over the top of those, and then 12 inches of rock underneath it. But so it'll be these bays like this. And again, we did these on the NASCAR Park project. Just some things I wanted to, for final considerations. This property was platted in 1953, and these lots have sat empty now for nearly 70 years. There's been multiple projects proposed for this ground. This isn't the first project proposed. There's been multiple ones proposed. Some of them had a lot of neighbor concerns. Some of them just ended up not being economically viable. But all those projects have failed in the past. And then, of course, the Scooters Coffee project that was proposed there at 53rd and Woodlawn. I was told that they're backing out of that and they're not going to proceed with that project at this time. There will still continue to be a commercial property adjacent to Woodlawn for commercial development, though. So we're not using the whole property up. The area where Scooters was going to be at, if they change their mind, they still have the property to do that with. The good news about this project is you wisely spent money improving Woodlawn. That road's being upgraded, so it's going to have the capacity to handle these homes. Somebody was guessing that we'd have 200 new residents in there, and it's probably closer to 100 is the real number, because we normally budget 2 to 3 people per dwelling unit, and with 36 dwelling units, that means somewhere between 75 and 110 people. But you got the roadway capacity with Woodlawn being upgraded. You're going to have the capacity in the area. Residential is generally considered a less intense use than commercial uses that are allowed for the site. And as we talked about, the process worked here. We came in, we said we wanted to do this. We heard neighborhood concerns, planning commission concerns. we've changed the project a pretty significant amount based on that feedback. And I think it's a better project for it. And I think the process has worked well. And then just in terms of the project, there'll be about $8 million investment in this property. So in the city of Bel Aire. So you're gaining $8 million worth of tax value for the city to benefit from. And there's 7.2 million in just the buildings by themselves. And when you think about it, he's going to spend as much on this piece of property as the city is spending on all of Woodlawn. With that, I'll just take any questions you all might have.
I've got a couple I'd like to go ahead and ask.
Okay.
Is the person that's doing this development today the same person that came in with the PUD in 2019?
No.
So that's changed hands. And a different issue, the drainage tanks, do those just percolate down into the soil, or how do they work?
So what they do actually is what we'll have is the Woodlawn project is installing a new storm sewer system, and there's an inlet proposed right here. We'll connect into that storm sewer system.
So it doesn't actually retain water then?
It detains, it doesn't retain, correct.
Okay, so we're still just flushing it on down the street.
Yeah, we're reducing it down to where it's no more than the pre-developed condition. But yeah, we're not stopping water from running downstream. But in every storm event, we are releasing less than what we calculated in the pre-developed condition, because that's actually required by city code. So we'll release lesser volume in terms of the peak capacity will be reduced in every storm.
So it will fill up and slowly drain is
Yeah,
the
that's
concept?
basically what'll happen. It'll slowly drain out over time. And so we're actually, we're holding it. Somebody made the comment that we need a 2-foot storm sewer pipe. We're actually only going to propose an 18-inch pipe for release because we do want to slow down the water coming out of this to help the downstream condition. We don't want to harm the downstream condition.
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Smith.
Yeah, so looking at the golden factors, I know the Planning Commission considered those, and based on the notes that I have, one of the things that they were thinking about is how this affects the nearby property, and you're exploring parking. That seemed to be a topic that you mentioned was brought up quite a bit, and it's something that was concerning to me as I looked at this. How did you and the Planning Commission get comfortable that the parking is going to be actually adequate for the number of vehicles that this type of establishment is going to draw? Is there any way to know that there's going to be adequate parking? And the real reason I'm concerned is in a lot of spaces when we have a residential development, you allot parking in a driveway or in parking spots, but then there's roads that people can park along for overflow, or if they have parties or guests, people will park out on the road and it's more of a temporary parking situation. And as I look at this, I don't see anywhere, for that overflow type parking when people have a lot of guests or parties. If the parking that's allocated there isn't sufficient for the homes, I guess people will park out on 45th Street, which would be a real concern. And so I'm just wanting to understand, what was that decision? How is everyone comfortable with this parking being adequate?
So, good question. And like I said, the Planning Commission said, we don't want you to come in with exactly 2 units or 2 parking stalls per acre. That's what the code requires. That's what code says is adequate. They said, don't come in with just that. And there's one thing I didn't mention earlier when I talked about, but as far as overflow parking, this parking here is more than adequate for the units here. So all of this is basically overflow parking on this spot. This area over here is basically overflow parking to some degree. We only have 5 extra spots though. So some of these spots would end up getting used by somebody on either side of the road. We talked about putting in additional parking. And of course, you heard the other component is providing an open space component to the project. And so we made the determination meeting code and having 5 extra spots was good enough. Now, the one thing that I didn't change on this that I'm going to change, Mr. Jordan, who's on Planning Commission, pointed out that this island is bigger than it needs to be, and we're going to squeeze 2 more spots out of this area here. So our final net one, and I think I may have even mentioned that in my notes here. Yeah, so with potential for 2 more, the 2 more would come here. So we'll end up with 7 more spots than code requires. As far as how many people are going to be there, you can run yourself in circles. I know one of the folks at the planning commission meeting said, well, you should have one per bedroom. And that's just nobody has that design standard. No development out there is told three. There's no city standard around here that requires 3 per dwelling unit. That's just not, it would be outside of the norm to have that type of requirement. So we're meeting the requirement, plus we'll have a minimum of 5 more, and we're planning on 7 more.
And kind of what I'm wondering about there is I can see how, like, typically that's going to be fine. You know, most of the time on averages, that's probably enough parking. And what I'm wondering is, are there other developments that have the characteristics like this, where there's really no other option for overflow parking? There's not a street a block away that you can easily park and walk to. Is this development unique in a way that, as it's designed, there's not overflow parking that can be taken advantage of in another location?
I can't speak to that specifically, no. So, yeah, like I said, we did increase, because of the concerns about parking, we did increase it to match code plus an extra 5. And like I said, the goal here is probably to go ahead and convert those 2 to make it 7 more than code. It's not a lot more, but it does provide at least a little buffer above the code.
Any other questions for Mr. Lee?
And Mr. Rolfe is here if you have any questions for him. I will say that my guess is if we have neighbors that are a problem as far as too many cars or complaints or those type of things, he's going to have a management company running this site that would take care of and address those kind of concerns. So if we did have problem residents, there'll be a mechanism for taking care of that. Because are you going to have just one company manage the whole property?
We have one company that will manage it. We do background checks, credit checks.
Mr. Mayor,
Zero tolerance policy.
I'm sorry. I would ask that
Yes.
you direct requests for comment to the mayor and let the
Okay.
mayor decide whether or not he
Sorry.
can speak.
Sorry. Well,
Thank you.
the developer can speak to that if you're interested.
Yeah, I'm fine with him speaking, but please come to the podium to speak if you would, please. Because people at home don't hear you when you're away
I'm
from the
Russell
mic.
Ralph, and we manage a number of properties in Bel Aire. We have a zero tolerance policy. We just really don't have any problems. If we do have a problem, they're given a 30-day if they don't want to correct that problem. So don't really have a lot of problem properties. We do background checks, credit checks. So I just don't have a lot of problems. And this property wouldn't be any different. So if we have an issue, it'd be addressed.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Smith?
does our city attorney or assistant city manager know, do we currently have rules that prohibit parking on 45th Street? That's really what I'm concerned about, is that this parking lot fills up, people start parking along 45th Street, and in 45th Street current condition, as it stands, people parking on it, I think, would create a safety issue. We talked about that with regards to fireworks, when a firework tent was put on this parcel, and I know temporary no parking signs were put up to emphasize no parking there, but I don't know if that's a reflection of a permanent status, or if that's something that would have to be explored.
Because 45th Street is an arterial, there is no parking allowed there. Now, without having a good picture in my head of how the easement and the road to emergency lane is laid out over there, there could be a risk of parking on 45th Street. And maybe, like with the temporary fireworks signage, maybe some permanent signage might be a solution, but it is not allowed because of the arterial nature of 45th Street. So
that's interesting to me, because I've never heard of that before. And I see parking on a lot of arterial streets in a lot of areas, not necessarily Bel Aire, but in Wichita and other areas. So I'd never heard just because it's an arterial street, there's no parking allowed. Is that our code?
let me pull up exactly where I got that from.
Okay. All right, thank you.
I'll jump in on that. As far as that comment goes, I did the Amidon design from 21st to 29th Street many years ago. And in areas where they allow parking on Sunday for churches, They actually have signs that say no parking except on Sundays along Amadon there to reflect that that's the only time you're allowed to park on Amadon is on Sundays.
Now they're closing the street because we're going to rebuild a bridge.
Well, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Smith.
The one other thing that I'm wondering about is, this is going to be 36 dwelling units on this property. There's going to be kind of one entrance and exit with it. It looks like there's 2 lanes, which is great for fire purposes. But we've talked a lot about, the 45th Street project and wanting to rebuild 45th Street. That's a really high density development with no secondary access to make a project like that work. How did the Planning Commission talk through that potential impact, and how will this development be affected when we rebuild 45th Street and have to shut down one lane for a period of time?
I'd have to double check the plans. I don't have it in front of me right here, but I actually believe the full width construction of 45th already extends to this project. So the widening, where the widening would be to the west of this, is my recollection.
As part of the Woodlawn project?
Yeah, as part, the Woodlawn project is actually already
Okay.
constructing most of that widening in this area already. So it's a good question, but yeah, that's actually part of the process. Is they're building that over there. The other thing I will say is, well, I don't know exactly if we're going to, I don't know that we'll get all the units in at once. I know he's planning on doing a large number of at once, and we'll make sure that there's the circulation. As far as the 2 entrances, I will mention that it is a 1 lane in, 2 lane out type of thing. So there is extra capacity for getting cars out of the units. But the fire department most definitely did want to have that separated drive aisle to provide a safer, if they're having an emergency event, that there's a safe way for residents to get in and out of the facility without the emergency vehicles blocking the way. And one thing that Mr. Rolfe mentioned to me as far as the overflow parking, we haven't had a specific discussion with the owners of Los Canados, which I did appreciate the mayor giving a shout out to Los Canados. I do agree that everybody should go support Los Canados. It's a great restaurant, but we could also talk to them about that being overflow parking in the evening if there was an issue. That's something we could have a conversation about, since that is right across the street. We haven't had that discussion, but we could certainly have that. If that was a concern, we could reach out to them to see what they would feel about that if it was after their hours where they're not in operation.
Mr. Mayor, the code in the zoning section 18 does require parking spaces be located entirely on a property, on the same property as the main use, with no parking into the street or other public right of way unless it falls within an exception. So there's generally no parking allowed on our streets unless there is some other, there's some other exception that applies to said street. So it's kind of
So that's the general rule. There's no parking allowed on an arterial street.
on streets, correct?
All streets?
Correct. It's saying unless,
Arterial.
Not residential, just.
well, yes, on streets unless they are identified in some other way. So you're thinking about, oh, why can I park in my neighborhood street? That's because when you get into neighborhood streets, there's some more laws that allow like standard parking and street parking in those neighborhoods and streets. But generally, the initial law would be no parking, and then the carve-outs start to come in. So 45th Street, without having some sort of special allowance, there is no parking. Your neighborhood developments will have some. So I can work with Chief to put together a map so you can see where the parking is allowed and not allowed.
So it's just interesting. I had never heard that before, so that's good to know. I've never gotten the ticket for it, but I never heard it before either.
I've got another question on the fire lanes.
Okay.
It's been my understanding that the fire department requires that they be able to turn around. They not back out. Is there sufficient space for them to be able to turn?
And we met with Chief Timmons and talked to him about that. And so we provided 2 different turnaround opportunities here. This right here at the west end, this is actually laid out specifically to the county's fire turnaround requirements. The length of that was specifically laid out to match what their requirements are for the turnaround. And then also for this part here, for the traffic up here, they can actually just use this intersection of the T to turn around in that area.
So
So
they'd be
that was
doing
specifically laid out with the county's requirements in mind.
a 3-point turn instead of a,
Yeah, it's a 3-point turn, but it is actually what is in their fire code for the turnaround. And we actually have the opportunity, if we really needed to, we could even extend this south one a little longer if we really wanted to. And if the county requested that, we could certainly make that one a little bit longer to ease that turnaround. But it is drawn to meet their standards.
okay.
Mr. Mayor. Mr. David.
The size of these condos, I wanted to get back to that 2 to 3 people per condo. What's the square footage of the condos? And then also, is the 8-foot wall part of the PUD? Is that written into the PUD, or how does that get enforced?
It's part of the landscaping plan that was agreed upon as part of that. But certainly, if that's a requirement that we need to add language of the PUD amendment is to have that on the face of the PUD, that's something we could certainly add on to that without any issue. If you wanted that codified into the PUD, we can certainly do that. Because that's the nice thing about it. We can take any minor feedback to this from the meeting like this that we needed to make an adjustment before we print it on the Mylar, we can certainly do.
Okay.
So if that's something, if that's the direction of the council that you would want to make sure that's added to the face of the PUD amendment, we would certainly do that without any concern at all. And I'll leave it to Jackie. Do you agree with that we could make a modification and add that language onto the face of the PUD amendment, the 8-foot fence requirement?
If, of course, ultimately it's approved that way here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can be added.
And then Russ, the square footage of the units. They're going to be 11 to 1,200 square feet.
Thank you.
And again, this here is almost exactly the same size footprint that we're proposing is that style of house right there. They may vary. There's a few different plans that are in that same size range, but it'll be something in that size range.
That's designed where one family lives on the lower level and another family lives on the top level.
That's correct.
Okay. That's what I thought. I wanted to make sure I was understanding it. Do we have any more questions for Mr. Lee or Mr. Ralph?
Thank you. And if anything else comes up in discussion, just let me know.
Well, I certainly appreciate all the work you've put into this. It looks like you've put a lot of thought into what you're wanting to do here. Unfortunately, I'm not in favor of this project myself. I think that the property abuts a single-family residential neighborhood. So the whole west side of Woodlawn has single-family homes. So it would be more sense to include a PUD revision that decreased the intensity of housing to get closer to single-family, not to increase it to intensity as we're being asked to do here. The nearby property is zoned commercial. That's the one to the east of this property. And having this rezoned to allow more intensive residential may discourage retail development at the intersection of Woodlawn and 45th. Woodlawn expansion, I think, will add value to this property for commercial development. And so leaving the PUD as is revising, allow the commercial rather than residential would be better approach. The adjacent property is east of the property is only 1.3 acres. So it's a bit small for commercial use. There's some that will make that work, but it's a little on the small side. I think if these were combined, that would be a much more reasonable commercial application. And adding 32 units and 16 buildings and 3 bedrooms each, nearby properties would likely negatively impact by increased traffic to the area and all hours and noise that comes with the intensity, whereas a C1 commercial would be active during business hours. So those are my basic objections to it. Not that I don't like all the work you've done. I just think the place you want to do it is really not the right place to do that. That's my opinion. I only get one vote here, so interested in hearing what council members have to say.
Mr. Mayor?
Sam?
I do appreciate very much the work that Mr. Ralph and Mr. Lee have put into this. When I started hearing rumblings of it back in June and watching it play out in Planning Commission, they have bent over backwards to make these accommodations. However, on balance, looking at the golden factors, I don't think this development quite fits in with the character of the neighborhood. And I have some of the same concerns regarding traffic flow. Woodlawn, God willing, this time next year won't be an issue. But we still have a lot of issues with the current condition of 45th Street to the west and the four-way stop at Oliver. And we don't have a clear path forward as of right now, how we're going to fund and rebuild that. So I did receive 5 or 6 comments from residents in the negative that kind of are kind of just hearing about this. So I wouldn't be prepared to vote yes for this right now. And I don't know that at this point in the foreseeable future I would ever be. At best, I might be open to tabling it in order to give it a chance to show up in the breeze and kind of have more people widely aware of it. And then I did want to address, I appreciate what Planning Commission said regarding the other, the nature of the other zoning in the area. But, Catholic care is a little bit different. Those folks aren't typically coming and going at rush hour and adding to school traffic and that sort of thing. So, again, just want to reiterate, I think I appreciate Mr. Ralph and Mr. Lee very much and how they've worked with Planning Commission, but as of right now, I'm not a yes on this.
Thank you. Any other council member would like to make any comments?
I missed somewhere how many acres this is that we're dealing with.
2.3, I think I read. Is that correct? 2.3.
So how did we get to 77? Not 77, I'm 18 buildings. Okay, never
16
mind.
buildings.
Well, see, I'm getting thrown off. What
it
is
18?
bothering me, what was bothering me is how much more dense R6 was than R5. And so I wasn't quite sure where we were falling in that range. The R6, the R5 probably was fine. I don't know about the R6. I'm still debating mentally while I sit here.
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Smith.
Councilmember Welch's comments there are exactly what I was thinking, when Mr. Lee described the current zoning of R5 and the number of dwelling units that could be put on that. And I heard that it felt like, oh yeah, that might actually work really nicely here because you do want some sort of buffer between commercial and large lot single family homes. I don't think, commercial right next to it makes a lot of sense. That R5 density, it's already platted, I think there may have been some wisdom in how that original PUD was done because as designed, it just looks like a lot's being put in a really small area, which if I were living right next door, I feel like that would really not be great for me. And I know that that's one of the things that we're supposed to consider is how this is going to affect the people that are nearby, the property nearby. And that's weighing on me pretty heavily right now.
So and it's really kind of an academic question, but I don't think this previous PUD was approved in 2019 because I don't remember it coming before the governing body while I've been on governing body. I think if I remember right, there was a plan years ago to put some storage units on that property. And I thought that was when that PUD was done.
So I looked we had a PUD document and it was published in 2019 is where I got that date from. I can't guarantee that that's the date, but that's the recollection I had from when I looked at that document. Could it have been from a year? Could it have been started before that? That's possible, but that was the published date that I saw in the document was in 2019.
Well, like I said, it's really more academic at this point. I remembered that storage unit thing, and I thought that was not a great use of that land. This is an improvement over that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if I may, can I make one more comment about the the R5 development on the property. I will tell you that at the cost that the developer paid for this property, because it is an area that is zoned commercial, nobody's going to be excited about doing R5 development there. And I don't know if he'll be able to make the project go with an R5 zoning, because when we went to originally, when we were talking about fire access, we wanted to buy some of the property north of that Scooter's Coffee, and he wanted $75,000 for a half an acre. So $150,000 an acre, and you cannot develop residential you can't do low density residential at that kind of cost per square foot. So it's one of those things that you'll need to make the decision you need to make on this, but I will tell you that that's only going to be commercial R6. That's unlikely to ever be able to be R5 property because of how much it costs to acquire the ground. It's just, you can't make the numbers work on it. So I just wanted to add that in there. So
Thank you.
thank you.
Any other discussion?
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Dean?
I do kind of share the same concerns as the rest of the council's pointed out. Some of the parking issues with it not being close to any other residential streets. I have the same concern with the commercial property and with wind lawn being improved, that this property will see better opportunity and a better chance to work with those other commercial properties. Right now, Catholic Care, we know it's fairly unlikely that that corner is ever going to do anything other than be Catholic Care. So I think we're locked in on the south side with our two developed commercial properties. And I kind of tend to think that it doesn't really fit. It feels like a corner that once improved would make our city better if it was commercial, and provide better for the citizens. So I'm not in favor of this for a lot of the same reasons.
Hearing no other discussion, I guess I could make a motion to deny the Arthur Heights PUD amendment as recommended by the Planning Commission, citing 4 of the golden factors: the character of the neighborhood, the zoning uses of nearby properties, stability of property for the use for which it is restricted, and the extent to which the change will detrimentally affect nearby property.
Second.
And I have a second by Ms. Hamburg. And this is a roll call vote, so I'll ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. Mr. Jim Benage,
Aye.
Mr. Greg David,
Nay.
Just for clarification, this is a motion to deny. So, okay, just want to make sure that, yeah. All right.
Mr. Tyler Dean,
Aye.
Miss Emily Hamburg,
Aye.
Mr. Justin Smith,
Aye.
and Mr. John Welch.
Aye.
And the motion carries, Mayor, 5-1, the motion to deny.
Thank you. Okay. All right, thank you for your time. Like I said, I really do think you guys done a lot of work. It looks really nice, but just wrong place. Thank you. Move on to item B. This is license and permit fees. So we talked about these at the workshop. Staff has recommended several changes to current fee schedule, and council reviewed the proposed changes at council workshop on September 13th. The fee schedule was last updated in 2019. The proposed changes are in line with current costs in other communities. Fees for service ensure that individual bearers most of the costs incurred to the city to provide that service. The new fees would take effect on January 1st, 2023. So our assistant city manager is here to answer any questions.
Really just updated what we talked about in the workshop. I did choose January 1, 2023, kind of give a long on ramp because we are making some changes. So I'll try to get, once we get it approved, if that's the will of the council, be able to get, some type of information out, stuff like that of our new fee structure. But that's pretty much it.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Smith,
I'm going to make a motion to approve a resolution concerning service, license, and permit fees within the corporate city limits of Bel Aire.
Second.
motion by Mr. Smith and second by Mr. Welch.
Oh, Mr. David.
With Mr. David, I'm sorry. Sometimes I don't hear it right. But thank you for the correction. Mr. David. Okay.
I would have done it.
Very good. All right. Glad we got it corrected. So, any additional discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 5-0. So executive session, I am going to ask for 2 executive sessions. And the first one is to discuss non-elected personnel matters. And this motion should only include the council members and will last about 10 minutes. I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Smith,
I'll make a motion to go into executive session for the sole purpose of discussing city council employees,
non-elected personnel matters.
non-elected personnel matters pursuant to the exception for non-elected personnel. The meeting will be for a period of 10 minutes and the open meeting will resume in council chambers at 8:41 p.m.
I'll second that.
Mr. Smith, Councilmember Smith, would you, I'm thinking you said the exception shall be for non-elected personnel matters. And then the reason was the same. I think the reason is to discuss the performance plan for those non-elected personnel matters. Would that be adequate to cover the reason? So would
My
you?
motion is amended.
Thank you.
I'll second the amendment.
Okay. So I have a motion by Mr. Smith and a second by Mr. Welch. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. We are in executive session for 10 minutes. Okay, I'm going to call the meeting back to order, and we held an executive session. No binding action was taken. So we'll move on to the next item, which is a second executive session to discuss contract negotiation matters. And this motion should include the assistant city manager and the city attorney, and it should be for 15 minutes.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Smith?
I'm actually going to make a motion for a 5-minute recess.
Oh, okay. Okay. We have
Some things are just
motion
more
from
important.
Mr. Smith for recess, and who made the second? Mr. David? Mr. David? Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. We're in recess for 5 minutes. Okay. Okay, we had a 5-minute recess. We'll call the meeting back to order. Obviously, we didn't discuss anything. Second executive session we need to hold is contract negotiation matters. And this should include the assistant city manager and the city attorney. And it should be for 15 minutes.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Smith.
I'll make a motion to go into executive session for the sole purpose of discussing the subject of attorney-client consultation regarding contract obligations pursuant to the KSA 754319 exception for attorney-client privilege. Inviting the assistant city manager and the city attorney. The meeting period will be for a time of 15 minutes, and the open meeting will resume in city council chambers at 9:01 p.m.
Second.
2 seconds, so I'll take Mr. Dean. Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 5-0. We held an executive session. No binding action was taken. Consider a motion to extend.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Smith.
I make a motion to extend the executive session for an additional 15 minutes with the open meeting resuming in city council chambers at 9:17 PM.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Motion by Mr. Smith and a second by Ms. Hamburg. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 5-0. Extend executive session 15 minutes. Okay, we'll call the meeting back to order. We held an executive session. No binding action was taken. We'll move on to discussion of future issues. Item 13. Are there any additional items that we need to discuss or future issues to mention?
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. David.
did we close the issue? It was brought up at either the workshop or the last council meeting about the intersection and how to speed up the work of the Woodlawn 45th intersection. I think there was some mention of if you close the thing down, you could get it done a lot faster. Is that way too late in the process?
Well, it may be, but whether it is or is not, it would be something that Pearson's would have to come back with a plan to do. Now, I will tell you an interesting thing I just learned today. I don't know if you know this, but the owners of Pearson used to own Cornejo Construction. It's the same people, but they sold Cornejo and then they started Pearson's. And I think they were probably a non-compete for a while, so they didn't do something or whatever. But today they announced that they bought the asphalt paving business of Cornejo. So maybe the reason we haven't seen the asphalt paving is because they're in the process of buying that business and going to get it done that way. I don't know. I'm just speculating here. Okay. But I did see that announcement today. So, but it would be Pearson's that would have to come back with a plan. And I think probably the best thing to do is just let me follow up with Dakota and say, are they thinking in those terms? Okay.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr.
just follow up
Dean.
from what I remember hearing during the presentation, Dakota did sound like they were contemplating it and that they were going to come back with some sort of proposal. I remember hearing him say that. So I think he thought by the next time he did his update, they would have that. That's what I recall.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I
Mr. Smith.
assume we'll hear from them at our October 4th meeting for our monthly update.
That's the typical cycle.
Okay.
I would ask about that too. Okay.
I'm going to throw out, I don't think the reason we have asphalt yet is the purchase.
I'm just being facetious about that. I
Okay,
don't really know.
well, they're dragging their heels on the curb, and until they get all that curb done, they can't lay the asphalt.
That's true. And they don't have it all done and they're
And-
working on the sidewalk and I see they had to
Yeah, I
do
saw
some of the curb.
Yeah, we should not be working on sidewalk until we get that street done if we can't get the street rolling.
Mr. Mayor,
Talk about it.
I think anything that we're saying is all just speculation. The reason why they may or may not be on the job has nothing to do with their contractual obligations. If they're meeting their contractual obligations, I think that's what we have to focus on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they technically are meeting their obligations.
Yeah. It's a time contract, 333 days. They've got to complete it in that time. I think there are penalties if they don't. So I'm a little bit hesitant to try to micromanage them, but if we have ideas for how to improve the cycling, okay, let's talk about it. Okay.
Yeah, one thing I thought of, and I don't know if we have the right of way or not, would be to build a temporary road north of the intersection so that we could work, so they could do the whole intersection at once.
Yeah, I'm sure we don't have that right away. I know a lot of that's owned by Catholic Care and you'd have to get a temporary easement to do that.
Yeah, it would probably just be cost prohibitive and time prohibitive to do that, I would believe. But we'll see what they come back with. If they have a proposal for shutting it down safely and getting it done quicker, we can entertain it.
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Smith.
The way I remembered is they actually brought it up, and then that's why I re-inquired about it last time, is because it sounded encouraging. So I think continuing to ask them about it is fair play and something that we should do. But to your point, micromanaging them isn't going to get us there.
Okay, I'll get hold of Dakota and see what we can learn. Okay. All right. Excuse me. Any other issues? And hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Mayor,
Nobody wants to go home. Mr.
make a
David.
motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion by Mr. David, second by Mr. Smith. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Too bad. We're adjourned.